We are podcasting from the Diocese of Raleigh Studios. Thank you for joining us on another edition of A Catholic Life. I'm your host, Billy Atwell. Many of you have been following the progress of the construction of Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral, either through holynamecathedralnc.org or from the regular emails that we send out. If you're not getting those, by the way, you can find a link at the in the footer at dioceseofraleigh.org, where you can see that you can subscribe to our e-newsletter. And we've been posting drone videos, photos, and aerial photos as well on that website, on Facebook, and we've been emailing those. But a part of the project that we haven't had the opportunity to discuss or really show to you very much are the stained glass windows. These windows are truly one of a kind and will be a critical artistic element of our new cathedral. I have with me today Joseph Beyer. He's the founder of Beyer Studios, who specializes in stained glass. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So tell us a little bit first about Beyer Studio, how you got started in the business, because it's a unique business.
It certainly is. I finished art school and I apprenticed at the Willett Studio, which was a famous old studio in Philadelphia. And it wasn't long after I was there that I dragged my soon-to-be wife, Rita, to join me there. She was working in the jewelry business. We had met in our junior year of high school at the Philadelphia College of Art, which is now the University of the Arts. And I was only there a few years at the Willett Studio when they sold the name, the business changed hands, and at some point they laid us all off. They laid Rita and I both off Memorial Day weekend, and we were getting married June 7th. So we were getting married a week later. So we had no kids or mortgage or anything like that. So it seemed like a good time for me to just go out on my own. So I did, and Rita did about 6 or 7 jobs to keep me afloat during the first year or two.
Wow.
Waiting on tables and writing art reviews, which she did for 25 years. She kept that up for a long time, helped someone write a book. So she did a lot of things to keep the business going in the beginning. And at some point I realized I was just being too dangerous trying to remove windows from the sides of churches on ladders by myself. So I hired one person, 2 people, and before I knew it, it snowballed. And I was very, very lucky and blessed, and I ended up growing to the point where now it's hard to believe it's 35 years, but it went very quickly.
I bet. So what are some of the projects, or what kind of stained glass windows do you typically do?
Well, our practice is mostly for Roman Catholic projects. We have done an awful lot of work with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and the Diocese of Allentown, which is the neighboring diocese above Philadelphia, and others as well. And we have become known for relocating stained glass windows from Catholic churches. And at some point, we realized we needed to drag the diocese kicking and screaming into the 21st century. So we created a website clearinghouse for stained glass that all denominations are welcome to participate in. And what we do is we will go in and document the stained glass windows with very high quality photography. Like high-definition photography, with bracketing the photos and measuring them very carefully, and listing them and posting it all on a website called the Sacred Window Rescue Project. And people don't pay, they don't rent time on this or anything. The only thing anybody ever has to pay for is like the effort to get it up there, the photography and documentation, that sort of thing. So we have this clearinghouse, and churches from all over the country then can view these windows with their architects and ideally build new churches around these windows. So it's a great way to rescue windows from churches in neighborhoods where they're redundant, the buildings are closed, and windows can't last forever. Simply leaving 100-year-old windows in place is not an option. For instance, the windows coming to the cathedral project, we have 40 windows that were almost 100 years old and in rather decrepit condition. They're held together with matrices of lead, and that lead deteriorates over time, just like the flashing on a roof or on a dome, and it needs to be replaced once a century, let's say. And what we usually do is take them apart and put them back together again, but sometimes we can save that original lead and get another 20 or 30 years out of it. But it's a great success story to see, at this point, 15, 20 years into this, there have been hundreds of windows relocated, thousands really. A lot of times it's whole church collections, and some of those churches in Philadelphia diocese were so large that we can take one collection and have windows go to 4 different projects.
Wow.
And they could be all over. One could stay close by in Philadelphia suburbs. The other ones could go to Texas or somewhere. So we have windows in most states in the union right now. We have windows going in a renovation of a cathedral in Anchorage right now.
Wow.
So they'll get boxed up and get shipped to Anchorage, and I'll send a crew of 2 guys up there to install them. It's a much smaller project, but running very much parallel to what's going on here in Raleigh with these windows.
Had anybody ever done that before? Created a clearinghouse, kind of a central place where you can go and see what's happening?
No.
Because it's a specialized field. It's a narrow. It's not like it's a pretty niche field. It's
Right.
not like you would naturally know where to go to find historic 100-year-old
where
windows.
do you go? And the problem is that there are antique dealers out there who are getting their hands on windows and representing windows like this, but the problem is they don't have the expertise to do the restoration work. And it's really important for churches to understand what they're getting into when a committee gets involved with old windows. It's harder if you have an old building. It's much easier if you're starting from scratch and you can literally build the church around the windows. I always say that we're the tail that wags the dog. And that's kind of what happened here. We start out with very careful consensus of dimensions about these windows coming here to the new cathedral. We measure them very carefully. Then we share that information with a frame maker in Jamaica, New York, digitally, all using the same CAD software that Jim O'Brien uses. And
Jim O'Brien being our architect. for the
indeed,
cathedral.
yes. So that frame maker will then engineer the window frame around them, making sure there's enough strength there for wind loading, etc. Then he will share all that information with the architect and back to us. We'll confirm it and say, yes, we're on board with all these dimensions. This works well. And then Jim will engineer the dimensions of the hole in the wall to accept the stained glass windows and their frames. So it's the opposite. Usually somebody makes a hole in the wall and they invite someone like me to fill it, but instead we're driving it from the opposite direction.
You made me think of this when you talked about CAD drawings, which are very, kind of a specialized software of sorts that are used by architects and folks like yourself. You started 35 years ago. What would you say is the single biggest difference in your work? Because, again, you're dealing with raw materials that don't change, right?
Right.
Maybe coatings and things do, and you're dealing with windows that we want to look and function a lot like they did 100 years ago. You want that timelessness to them. But what would you say is the biggest difference in your industry now?
It is a curious mix. We have a medium that has not essentially changed in any of its composition since the Middle Ages. I say the biggest difference is that our soldering irons plug in now. We don't heat them over charcoal. But the things like CAD, and not only CAD, but the ability to communicate digitally in real time with Jim O'Brien, the architect's office, the people making the frames, engineering them in Jamaica, New York, and us in Philadelphia. So we have 3 different states talking to each other in real time. And without that sort of thing happening, it would never be possible to accomplish a project like this as quickly as it's happening. And also to avoid mistakes.
Yeah.
So we remove all these old windows, and everyone likes to talk about old world craftsmanship, and it certainly was spectacular because we see all these thousands of ancient windows coming, most of them coming from Bavaria. The Munich school was very popular for Catholic churches, but they didn't have faxes or telecopy or email, so they came over, and we see the results of them just getting things wrong, just miscommunication, that the window is so big and the hole is not matching it. So we see a lot of mistakes in the old days, and fortunately we're able to avoid most of that because of the depth and quality of communication. That's probably the biggest contribution that technology gives us.
Do you readily think about the fact that when you put in windows like you'll do for our cathedral, that there will be someone 100 years from then taking those out and analyzing the craftsmanship of what you and your team are doing? I mean, that makes you a part of such a long tail of history. Like, I am in communications. I'll be long forgotten. 100 years from now, if you could find my name in any data book, you'd be happy. But I mean, your contributions artistically to this cathedral are going to live on for generations and generations. Do you actively think about that, or is
Oh,
it
you
something?
bet.
Yeah.
You bet I do. And people always come up to me and say, "Well, that's not lead, is it?" I said, "Yes, it is." I said to someone yesterday that they still make violins out of spruce and maple, even though they've tried other materials, but nothing sounds the same. So which comes first? Our desire to hear that sound, or we're just so used to that nothing else will please our ears in the same way? And we still use lead because there is simply no other material, no other plastic that will last as long in exposure to the weather, ultraviolet light. There is nothing that will work as well, nothing that is as strong and as soft as lead. So, and the beauty of it is that I know that a century from now, when I'm long gone, someone can come and do to my windows exactly what I'm doing to Paula Bolano's windows that she made for Ascension Church, and are now going to have another whole generation of life here in Raleigh.
I want to come back to her in a second, but first, so there are 40 windows that were taken out of the church in Philadelphia that you mentioned, Ascension Church,
Yes.
right? And that were taken from the 40 of those, but those aren't all the windows that you're doing.
No.
You're doing, talk about the full scope of the windows.
Yes, well, this
And
project...
try to do it without heart palpitations.
Yeah, right.
Because it's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, this project has 90 windows in it. And a building this size, of course, the windows are on a grand scale. The clerestory windows are 17 feet 8 inches tall, which is a big window by anybody's standards.
Describe where a clerestory is in a cathedral.
Clerestory is the upper level of a church, the very highest windows that you're always looking straight up to see. And they will run down the aisles and along the transepts, along the tail and the arms of a cruciform-shaped church.
So if I'm inside the nave, they're not the ones that I could almost reach and touch. You're talking about the ones that are kind of that upper level beyond
A second
that.
tier,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so those are the
So
clerestory.
that's the clerestory windows, and there's 37 of those, I believe, 10 of which will come from Ascension Church and be completely taken apart and rebuilt and restored. But the other 17 will be all made new from completely new materials.
Wow.
So there's 27 clerestory windows around the interior of the building. So we are going, in fact, I am now working on developing the subject matter. What will be the subjects of those windows? They will be not as richly colored, not as dark, because we want the cathedral to be somewhat lighter on the interior, because now our participation in the liturgy requires that we be able to read text, whereas when in the Middle Ages, that wasn't required of anybody. So the church will be a little brighter, and these windows will consequently be lighter than the windows we're bringing from the Ascension Project, which are rather dark, deliberately so, and very mystical. But the windows we're making will have all the same properties, the same quality of glass, just a lot lighter in a larger field around medallions. So each one will have a symbolic medallion centrally located in the window that will probably speak to the subject matter of the windows adjacent. For instance, the window next to the Annunciation may reference, something along the storyline of the Nativity. But we're all still developing that, so that is not to be decided. We also have two very large rose windows at the ends of the arms of the cross in the transepts, a north and south rose, that are still in the design process. So I would say this project will be 60% new windows, for which we will be using all handmade glass. So everyone's seen glass blown. The process, and the glass we're using is not made by machine. It is all blown by hand.
Do you all do that yourself?
No. Most of the glass we'll be using will be coming from a certain company in Germany called Lambert's, and we are one of the largest buyers of this material.
Wow.
And it's hand-blown glass. They literally blow a large beach ball size bubble of glass and stretch this out and then lay it open into a sheet. It's art before it gets to us. Each sheet is about 2 foot by 3 foot, and they vary a lot in terms of depth and color. One sheet here, it's light, it's darker over in this corner, and we appreciate that the same way a woodworker will appreciate the grain in wood. So we manipulate that a lot, and we have hundreds of colors available to us. I'm also trying to acquire glass from Milton, West Virginia, from a company called Blanco. And I'm speaking to them now because some of their glass was used in the original Paula Bolano windows from Philadelphia. So I'd like to see some of that glass get in these windows too, yeah.
Wow.
So we will make patterns for all these windows, the new windows, and it's just like a suit of clothes. You'll have a pattern for every piece of glass. I think I mentioned to somebody yesterday, of all the, just in the restored window, we figure there's about 500,000 pieces of glass in those. So we'll be cutting
500,000 pieces of glass.
Yes.
In the restored windows alone.
Yes.
That is incredible.
That's just a guesstimate, but it's a pretty good guess.
Wow.
So that's how many we're going to be cleaning in the next year or so.
So you have 600 or 700 employees working on that, I guess?
No.
You wish?
No. Thank goodness for headphones and earbuds, because otherwise I think they'd all go crazy.
How long does that take?
You'd be surprised how fast they can go through that. And then they have to put it back together again, too. But there's so many steps along the way. To making them. So back to the process. We cut the pieces of glass, and we select them too. And the selection process is really important. It's sort of like orchestrating a piece of music. You can write the notes, but whoever orchestrates it will their interpretation will make a very different window than somebody else's. So that selecting the glass for a window is a very important part of the process.
Right.
And then it all gets cut up with a glass cutter. And we'll get you some video of this so that people can see the depth of skill involved in cutting glass, which is, I would rather do that all day than spreadsheets and email. It's a lot of fun.
That's why you got into the work, I'm
yes.
sure.
So all the pieces get cut up. The most important part of the process is a painting process. So people hear about painted glass. How does it get painted? Do you paint the color on? The answer is no. The color is in the glass itself. Most people have heard of cobalt blue, and what they do to make the color is they add a mineral or a metal like cobalt to the recipe for glass. And by the addition of that metal, it changes the color of the glass when it's cooled. The glass is just a liquid that happens to be ice at room temperature. And those metals will make the colors. So we have a myriad of colors, a beautiful, and that's why we use the hand-blown glass, because we can buy cheaper glass, but we just don't have the quality of color, the range of hundreds of colors to choose from. So we will use this glass, cut it all up, and it does get painted. So how does it get painted? If you're not painting the color, what are you painting? The painting is more like draftsmanship, where we can draw on a piece of glass, and that's how a certain piece of glass will take on the character of a face or a hand or an inscription or clouds in a background or just decorative pattern work. The paint is vitreous glass paint, which is powdered iron oxide, almost like powdered rust. And you can mix this up as a pigment with various mediums. In the Middle Ages, they used wine, of course, in France. We can use gum arabic, the binder in watercolor. We can also use oil of clove or lavender oil. And these various ingredients will allow us to manipulate it as artists in various ways. So we can make a very smooth progression in a face, very, very, very delicate shading, or we can scratch out delicate inscriptions and do a lot of painterly things with it, but it's not color. It is basically a black pigment that blocks the light. So we're subtracting some of the light out of the window, but we're adding a whole lot of content in terms of design.
Almost like a filter?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So it's almost like a charcoal drawing on the glass. We are doing draftsmanship on the window to give it a great deal more character. That's how a whole, hundreds of pieces of glass can end up being a crucifixion, because the draftsmanship will impart all these figures with a lively character of emotion and facial features and drapery, etc.
So those are for the 50 new
Yes.
glass.
It's a repeat of the process that the Ascension windows all went through.
So let's go back to those that are restored. The woman who designed them and made them.
Yes.
Paula Bolano.
Paula Himmelsbach-Bolano was a native of Belgium who emigrated to the United States when she was still a child and went through art school in Philadelphia and traveled Europe and came to stained glass late in her career. I think she was in her 40s before she fell in love with the medium. As many artists in the United States, they made trips to Europe and fell in love with stained glass medium, viewing all the cathedrals in France.
Right.
So she came back. She did an apprenticeship with another famous studio in Philadelphia and then went out on her own. And as far as I know, she is the first woman to have a stained glass studio of her own. Other artists in Philadelphia even, other females had done stained glass windows here and there. She's not the first woman to do stained glass by a long shot, but to have her own studio and fill whole churches, I think that might be a first. That's another bit of history about these windows.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And the picture you gave us, she looked like a kind of a rough cookie.
She looked like somebody you'd like to have a beer with for an evening. I think she'd be a really interesting character.
I can
and
imagine.
we just love her windows. When we put them up, they are very traditional in the Gothic revival tradition of Catholic architecture, but they all bear her character and have a lively energy about them that could never have happened in the Middle Ages and not before her time. They really do belong to the 1920s.
Huh.
It's kind of fascinating for us to work with these things. The more we see, the more we can't get enough of them.
So let's go to the process a little bit. So the windows were taken out of Ascension Church. That, I'm sure, was a very delicate process.
Yes. I refer to it as the root canal of stained glass. The windows were set in place in putty. In Ascension, the window frames were actually terracotta. Like fired clay, and the windows are impacted into the walls, and they were packed with putty. So we have to carefully chisel away the putty that seals them in place. And the putty had lead in it. So everybody has to be protected with surgical gloves, Tyvek suits, and complicated respirators. They don all this, and then at lunchtime they discard all that and put on completely new outfits.
Wow.
Just to do this removal, they had to build up scaffold. The sills were probably 15 feet off the ground. So the sills were very high. 40 feet of scaffold goes up to every window to extract these things. So we're used to that sort of thing. It's not a problem, but we are very, very careful. The health and safety is... it's an everyday effort on our part that we can never forget about.
And we're grateful for the work of your folks. And I know with Tick Clancy, with Clancy and Thays, the bishop has expressed to him and to his workers many times when he's gone out to do blessings on the site how grateful we are for the work that they do, because we know it's dangerous work. And with yours, they're dealing with things like lead, and if you're removing it from a wall, I'm sure that's the respirators. There's an element of danger to that, and we're very grateful for the work that they do, because it is contributing to, it's like you've said before, it's they're rescuing Catholic art history in the United States, and they're continuing this work of Paula Bolano, and it's coming to our new cathedral, and it's going to live on for many, many years. But we're very appreciative. So the windows come out, and then they were. In order to go to the next step, you're obviously replacing the old lead with new. So all those pieces, those 500,000 pieces, have to be taken apart individually?
Yes. What we will do to protect ourselves is we will disassemble the entire window. Before we do that, we need to make a record of it. So what we do is we'll lay it down flat on a table and then use a stick of graphite over a sheet of paper and make a rubbing like people used to do in graveyards. Take that graphite and rub it over the entire window and make a accurate record, very detailed, of the pattern of the leading. Because once you take it apart, it's where did this piece go? With all these hundreds and hundreds of pieces in each section, it'd be easy to lose your place. So by having this roadmap, we have a permanent record and can always relocate where a piece belongs. We're very good at puzzles.
I can imagine.
So,
yes.
Some of the pieces get broken over the years, especially at the bottom of the window where they had ventilators that they could open and close. So slamming the vents closed and the side of the building that was next to the schoolyard, there would always be breakage over a century. Some pieces get broken. So we will glue them with a very sophisticated epoxy that is used in all the cathedrals in Europe and museums in the United States to restore original pieces of glass. So we'll retain anything that's broken. Nothing gets discarded unless it's missing or shattered beyond retention. If some fragments are missing, then it's not a good candidate for gluing. But we will use this epoxy to save any original pieces that we can. And then it gets reassembled. We will have all the same size leads, various widths of lead from 3/16, quarter, 5/16, half inch, all the way up to 1.5 inch wide strips of lead. And it's an extrusion. It's forced through a die to make, imagine an uppercase H, and then take that letter and lay it on its side, and now you have a cavity on each side of a vertical post, like an I-beam, and the glass is inserted on both sides of this.
Okay.
So they'll assemble it on a bench using that original brown paper drawing, that rubbing, and then they will start with lead, glass, and continue to build like this. The largest sections, even in the window, are probably like 60 by 33 inches, let's say. I would expect one of my faster craftsmen to put that back together again in a day and a half.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they can go right through that. Then it needs to go through a waterproofing process. Putty is what we use. They take putty that is colored black for us, and they force it underneath the leads, clean that all up, flip the whole window over, clean it up again with more putty, waterproofing. The windows would have been waterproof. Of course, today, the window will have a double layer of clear glass on the exterior to protect the windows, keep them out of the weather, and also provide a much more efficient thermal barrier for the interior of the building.
Right.
But the stained glass will be mounted on the inside. So we don't need them to be weatherproof anymore, but the putty does stiffen them up. So it's assembled. All the joints where the leads intersect are soldered first. The putty goes in, it gets cleaned up. The final step is reinforcing. We will add steel bars to the windows, and each section will get 2 or 3 bars depending on the size and shape of the section. We will solder them directly to the lead matrix because the lead is very soft, the glass is very heavy, and it needs some extra reinforcing. And we know that because we fixed so many old windows that we know what works now. We have the benefit of hindsight that people 100 years ago didn't have because there was no stained glass in the United States before the turn of the 20th century. Really is when stained glass really took off in the United States. So the people who made those windows at Ascension didn't restore any windows like we do. There weren't any stained glass windows old enough. So we get to second guess them about what's the best way to reinforce these windows. So we will add bars to these windows. Occasionally, I know in some of the illustrations I sent to you there, you can see where someone is literally bending the bar to go around a halo so it doesn't go straight through someone's forehead in the composition. But they get soldered directly to the section. Then they just go into storage, and then tag teams of installers will be driving windows down here from Philadelphia on a regular basis, installing them on the interior, starting with the highest windows because we need to use a 60-foot scissor lift just to reach the tops of these windows.
Yes, and I'm assuming you wouldn't want to drive that scissor lift over, our new tile and things like that.
Indeed. So we are a player in the project, and we have to work very closely with Tick Clancy and the entire team and be a team member.
Really? Yeah. Now, so the Claire story, those will go up first. There is how do you maintain them over time then? Because you've got the scissor lift that goes in. Is there maintenance that it's needed, or do you wait until that 100-year point when
they will not need any? I'm guaranteeing that they will need no attention for a long time. I would say maybe 60 to 80 years they should start examining them, but I would expect that they could go a century without needing any attention from anyone. They don't need to be cleaned.
That's amazing, because you think of most things that are older, any antique of sorts, usually requires the most amount of maintenance.
Yeah.
But these are almost the opposite, where
Well, it's
you don't
it's
need-
about, like a slate roof will probably last that long. 80
Yeah.
to 100 years, and that's about the age of all the windows that we relocate and restore, even if they're staying where they are. When a window gets to be 100 years old, and now there are a great many, all the great age of church building in the United States, the first one was a period from, let's say, 1885 through the Second World War. There were hundreds of thousands of churches built throughout the United States. Most of the best of them had stained glass windows. Well, now all those stained glass windows in all those communities throughout the United States are all coming due, and they all need restoration at the same time. So we could do nothing but fix old windows that end up going back into their original locations. That would keep us busy forever.
Yeah.
We're engaged in a project now at Valley Forge, restoring windows there in an Episcopal chapel there that were made by the DeScenzo studio, the same company that made the stations coming here to the cathedral, and the same company where Paula Bolano, who made the Ascension windows, did her apprenticeship.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the continuity of some of these studios
Yes.
that have been involved in these projects over time, and how they would have never imagined that these would all come back all these players would come back together.
And what goes around comes around. Rita and I apprenticed at a studio that had some very old painters who worked for Nicola DeScenzo.
It's almost like if you wrote this into a movie script, no one would believe it.
Well, now colleges are onto the wisdom of doing internships. And I have interns all the time from colleges, 2 or 3. And that's how we find our best people. And some of them stay around for decades. And that's essentially what we did. They just called it an apprenticeship then.
Yeah.
And we were paid for it instead of paying them. Well, we pay our interns because we figure, you get what you pay for. But we find a lot of good people that way from colleges.
Wow.
It's a unique career path.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. And we're so grateful for the work of you and your team. It's obviously a long project, and we'll be partners for a long time here, but we're so grateful for everything that you're doing, and for the tremendous passion you have, because it's one thing to just do the job that is requested of you, but you have such joy in this and such passion, and you have an appreciation for the art itself and the new cathedral that they're going to go into.
Yeah, and talk about grateful. I mean, it's not every year that someone comes to me with a project like this, a cathedral project. And this is our opportunity, not just me and the people at our studio. I referenced the great age of church building in the United States. We're in the middle of one right now. It might not seem that way because it surrounds us, but we really are. I can't keep up with the request for people who want to talk to me about stained glass. Especially, and they're all Roman Catholic projects, all of them. Everything we do, my office is stuffed with drawings of new Catholic churches all over the United States. We have projects in Arizona, I mentioned Alaska, all throughout, especially the South and Southwest, West, all over. Old windows, new windows. We are incredibly busy. And so this is, right now, we are in the midst of a great age of Catholic church building. And this is our chance to leave our mark as Americans. This is our turn to leave our own personality on the history of Catholic art. You see.
That's such a wonderful perspective. And for the listeners out there, there is an opportunity, if you're interested in being kind of a direct participant in this whole thing, in that there are still windows available if you're looking to memorialize your family or an individual, or a naming opportunity for these windows. Those are still available. If that's something that you're interested in pursuing, and having your family's name or some individual's name as an ongoing perpetual legacy in Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral, connected to the history that's being brought in and worked on by Beyer Studio, you're going to want to contact our new Executive Director of Development. His name is Greg Leitner. You can contact him one of two ways. You can either give him a call. It would be 919-821-9721, or you can shoot him an email. It's Greg, Greg, .leitner at raldioc.org. And you can discuss those with him, and they've got a great brochure of what naming opportunities and memorial opportunities are left with regard to the stained glass windows in particular, but other items as well that you might want to be a part of, because this kind of opportunity comes around once in a lifetime. And the work that Beyer Studio is doing for us, it's not only fantastic, but it's part of our history. It's part of our history here in North Carolina and in this country. I'm so grateful for you stopping by the studio and discussing this with us and sharing some of this amazing information, this kind of behind-the-scenes peek at how you do what you do, and why it's important that we keep up with the status of the project, because it's one of a kind.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share this with the people of this diocese. And I would just say stay tuned, because we are going to be partnering to bring a lot more information, a lot more visuals, stills, and video to share with everybody in the diocese, so they can keep track of the progress of these windows being restored as well as the new ones being made.
Absolutely, yeah. So stay tuned on that. There's a lot more to come on the windows, on the new pipe organ, which in itself is an amazing feat, as well as the bells that are going to be going on, a full carillon of bells. So you're going to want to stay tuned on a number of these pieces. So thank you all for listening to this the Catholic Life podcast. You can find us under the multimedia section of dioceseofraleigh.org. It's there that you can find other videos and podcast offerings like Raleigh to Rome, our weekly 6-minute or less news brief on local and global Catholic news. You can get the latest from the diocese directly to your email inbox. Just go to dioceseofraleigh.org and click on the email newsletter link in the footer. Don't forget, everyone, many of the programs, ministries, and charities of the diocese are made possible because of the generous contributions to the bishop's annual appeal. As always, may God continue to bless you and those that you love.